Welcome to Let's Talk Near Death, the podcast show where we talk about life, death, and experiences somewhere in between. My name is Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I welcome you to join me as I talk to everyday people with not so everyday experiences. You may also wish to join the conversation on the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page or access additional VIP content as a premium subscriber via Patreon. For just a couple of dollars a month, you can get an early access to episodes, additional bonus content, and your chance to connect with my guests. To do so, simply visit patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. Let's talk near death. Today I'm chatting with Edy Nathan, who's a grief expert in trauma, grief, and sexuality. Edy has 20 plus years and an experience as a psychotherapist, and she integrates her formal training with her on-the-ground experience to help people thrive. She's been featured on multiple platforms, including NBC, Fox News, Psychology Today, and Thrive Global. Edy's also had her own near-death experience, which she believes was in utero, and we'll talk about that very soon. And she's also helping other near-death experiences come to terms with their experience and has a vast knowledge in this area. So Edy, welcome to the show. It's fantastic to have you here.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much.
So tell us, how did you get into all of this? What got you started?
You know how things in life come to you. You don't seek them out. They just are.
For sure.
Right. And so this really came to me, and it continued to come to me in bits and pieces. So I would say that it really started when I was yay high, 2 years old, and I ran into my parents' bedroom. My poor parents didn't know what to do with me. I ran into my parents' bedroom and I said, "Why were we born if only to die?" And that was the climate of that early part of my life, which was really questioning life, knowing about death when I hadn't experienced anyone around me of significance dying. And yet it was a knowing. And that knowing really was very compelling throughout my life, and has informed choices that I've made, and has also, been something that I've wanted to push away and ignore. And I have a magnet on my refrigerator, and it's a pirate's chest. And there's a button on the pirate's chest. And when you push the button, there's a knock, 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 knock. And it says, "Let me out of here." And in a way, that's what continued to happen with this spiritual energy, the emergency that happens, and the emergence that also happens as a result of when you can no longer ignore, and it's a call, and you must acknowledge and accept.
Yeah. So 2 years old is quite early to be considering the concept of life and death. Where did that come from? You said that you had an experience when you were in utero.
So through some regression work, I was very, very lucky to have trained with Brian Weiss, who's a past life regressionist, and also Roger Woolger. And their techniques were very, very different. But through each of the experiences I had with these two experts in the field of past life regression, I went back in utero. That's one of the things and one of the processes that they really have you engage with. And in that process, was very aligned with the fact that something had happened where I'd lost myself. I was dead. And when I was a breech birth, and because of the way that it was breech, it's very possible, and this is what I see, that I died in utero, and that when I came out, I was fine and everything was fine, except that I had this feeling about life and death, and no one to share it with, because it was you're two, what words do you have, really, right? So it became a very internal process, which what I've learned working with NDEs, working with spiritual emergence and the emergency that usually comes before that spiritual emergence, that what gets evoked, or what got evoked, was a kind of a love-hate relationship with death, with life, with who am I, and somehow I want to go back, and a knowing of death, which really is what got me involved in the journey of working with grief and working within the world of spirituality.
Right. And so as you've been doing this work, what has come up out of that experience that you had when you were younger?
It's certainly one of my greatest teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And it forces me as a human to commit to life and to appreciate life, and to know that anything is possible. So in my work, when I see clients, when I'm doing workshops, when I'm keynoting, the message is go for what is possible, because anything is possible. And it comes from that experience, that very first experience that I couldn't put words to, that anything is possible.
I absolutely love that. Go for anything. Anything is possible. It's interesting because I do a lot of speaking, and I do some workshops and things like that. And the message that I'm giving is very, very similar. My message is more around our circumstances don't contain us, that anything is possible outside of our current circumstances. I'd love to delve into more of the work you've been doing. Have you been doing some research as well, or is it mostly around the stuff that you've been working with people?
You know, you've got such a good point there. We really do need as much research and researchers out there around NDEs, around, you know, spiritual emergencies and emergence. I'm not currently doing research. In my brain, I'm taking in the information. I'm calculating how to use what I see, what I feel, all of the nonverbal communication that certainly needs to be held. And being a therapist in a world where, you know, the language is so important, when someone walks into my office, or there's a group of people with whom I'm speaking, everyone I meet gives me more information to better understand just how flexible one needs to be when taking in this information. And so, though no, I don't have any hardcore research, the human contact and the realization that everyone's experience is different, even if it's the same, is really the tagline that I also have around grief and loss. That, you know, you may have lost someone, you may have not wanted to come back here, or you may have had a split decision where on one hand you want to come back and you felt the need to come back, and then on the other hand you really want to stay back, and that limbo is one of the hardest places to be. And it's hard to get research on it, but it's compelling for sure.
So how do people find you then, these people that have had the near-death experiences? That people know you, you have a name, and people know they can come get help from you, or how does it work?
Yes, and it's also, so I was on a show 2009 called Psychic Kids, Children of the Paranormal, and I was the therapist on the show.
Yeah.
And I did that for about 2.5 years, and that was really getting my experience, my name out there in terms of working with, yes, psychic ability, but then moving that really into just a much larger spiritual platform. I'm also part of an organization called Assist. And Assist is, do you know of it? Do you know?
I'm
Assist?
not familiar with Assist, but is it an American?
So it's actually, it's American, but it's international.
I'll have to go and have a
It's
look, I think.
yeah, um, it's just talk about bringing in research. Talk about bringing in. I mean, there are researchers, there are transformational therapists, there are people who are from all walks of life who are clinicians and really trying to figure out the best way to help someone who's in a spiritual emergency or who feels overwhelmed by things that they're seeing or hearing, and too often people have been misdiagnosed and and of course, hospitalized when indeed there was another conversation that needed to be had.
Mm.
And too often, doctors will, poo-poo someone saying, I saw the whole thing, but more and more there's proof, and a lot of the research is being done around that. So this is the ASSIST stands for the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences.
Oh, wow.
And they have a conference once a year here in the United States. And it is really a wonderful, wonderful organization that I've spoken at and have created formed wonderful professional collegial relationships, and also made some pretty good friends.
Right. Yeah. That sounds absolutely amazing that there is this support network. I don't know anything about any other support network, so I'm so encouraged to hear this.
Yes.
How widely known is it about there? Is it something that a doctor will refer somebody to, or how do people get into the
So
system?
yes, so it's very easy to go onto their website, and they have a list of clinicians who have been certified by them, and people can, work with these clinicians. Some of these clinicians are not in the United States; they're in other parts of the world, and some of them are here in the United States. It is it's 6 years old. This organization, actually, it's longer. It's more than 6 years old. But I think that the conference has been going on for 6 years. It's actually 2008, 2009 was when I believe it started. But don't quote me on that. I'm not positive.
That's right. I have to go and have a look, I think. It sounds
Yes.
amazing, though. It's just, yeah, I'm excited to hear that something like this exists. And I'm sure our
They have
listeners who are listening would be interested to go find it too.
Oh, yes, definitely. They have an experiencer forum. They've got integration narratives. They've got a newsletter. They've got archives from their conferences.
Yeah.
So it is a wonderful, wonderful platform, and we invite people to come and visit and come to our conferences and meet some amazing folks.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. I'm definitely going to have a look straight after this.
Good. Good. I'm so
So,
glad.
what type of things have you been seeing as you've been helping experiences? People have had the NDE. What are some patterns that you've been seeing, or is there anything in, I guess, any similarities, or what can you pull out from the work that you've been doing?
Do you know the limbo that we were talking about? The I want to be here and I don't want to be here.
Yes, I think a lot of people relate to that. So you're explaining about how want to live, but also want to go back to that beautiful place,
That's
want
right.
to end life, but actually don't want to end life.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's not and it's interesting because it's not even an ending. It's like to go back is a
Yeah.
beginning. And so it's that beginning that is so inviting.
Mm.
And yet knowing that the presence here is important for family members, for loved ones, for friends,
Yeah.
and really trying to mitigate the balance of wanting to be somewhere else that's
Yeah.
not here. And I think it's especially difficult because so often people around you, when they love you, they can't understand why you're not thrilled that you survived.
Yeah.
And the grief in that is huge because, I mean, if you've chosen to be here, even though you're in limbo, it would be great to have the understanding of others who care for you, but they don't understand this limbo. And therefore you swallow it. You don't take it in. You swallow your feelings. And in the swallowing of the feelings, that then can create clinical depression, anxiety, anger. I see anxiety as unexpressed anger. And so how do you find a way out of the depression because you're swallowing some of that? And the best advice I can give is try to find other people who've had an NDE. Try to feel that you're not so alone. Try to find a community. And with the internet, it's a lot easier to do that than ever before.
Definitely. So that's quite a common side effect from the NDE, isn't it? To get into this place of anxiety or depression or not feeling you can settle. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, that you can settle. That's exactly right.
Yeah, because you've got a foot in two places.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's split. And sometimes when we're split, like I feel happy and then sometimes I feel sad, you can talk about it. But many clinicians, someone comes in and says, so I've had a near-death experience. Well, there are a lot of clinicians that are going to say, well, no, that actually didn't happen. You were probably dreaming. And right there's nowhere to go.
Exactly.
Right? Right? So when you have nowhere to go, when you're on lockdown, when you're in that place of that pirate's chest and you're knocking and you're saying, let me out of here, but there's no one to receive you. There's no one to hold you. There's no one to understand. It makes the journey a very long journey and then makes the other side that much more compelling.
So do you think that we're seeing an increase in the acceptance of these types of experiences from a medical or clinical point of view?
Yes and no. There's a limbo. That's a limbo response, which there are. The more that doctors experience this, they are talking about it. And at the conference, we had a wonderful physician speaking about his experience with a patient and then his own experience of a Kundalini awakening. And it was like, oh my God, this is real. And so he talks about this and he goes around to his physicians and his colleagues and says, this is real. So if you have somebody who says, look, I was outside my body, I can tell you the conversation, I can tell you what was going on in the next room. And I know you were trying very hard to get me to come back and I didn't want to. And you kept pounding on my chest. And meanwhile, there was an amputation that was going on in the next room. I saw it happening. And he's relating this whole story. And he's like, it's real because that's exactly what was going on in the next room. And I don't go into that other room because that room is dedicated for that.
Exactly.
So the more that we can get doctors and clinicians and PAs and therapists educated in listening on a different level, there will be more acceptance. And it's happening. It's happening marginally. It's happening as more people are discussing this. And like, look at this show that you've got going on here. You're getting the message out.
Yeah.
And that's what we need. It's like, oh, wow, it's an awakening. It's not being afraid to say, this was my experience. And if you want to call me crazy, okay, but I know I'm not crazy. And I'm going to keep talking about it. And I'm going to keep driving it home. And I'm going to keep saying, this happened to me. So this is what my clients and I work on, is for them to have the voice.
Yeah. And that can take so long. It took me years and years and years before I could actually come to terms with what had happened and to talk about it publicly. And I had no interest in doing that. And yet here I am running the show and being very public. So I do think it's on the rise. I think the awareness is changing. It's hard to say. So I guess one of my questions is whether I'm trying to work out whether the conversation is actually rising, that there are more people having the experiences. So we've got the internet now, which is a lot more sharing. There's a lot more awareness out there, but also
Yes.
we've got more modern resuscitation techniques. We've got more advanced medical care, equipment, education. Everything's on the increase and the rise, and we're learning more and more about how to save people and to bring them back when they're on the brink of death. So it's hard to say whether there are more experiences happening or whether it's just a more open topic and that more people talk about it these days. Have you got any perception or any ideas around that?
Oh, it's such a great question. And you're so right, like, and maybe it's a yes and rather than an either or.
Yeah, okay, I love that.
You know, maybe it's the yes, we are bringing people back. And so because we're bringing people back, because our expertise within the field of medicine is increasing in terms of our techniques and what we can do to help someone come back,
Mm,
that then more people are saying, this is what happened. This
mm,
was like, and so a combination that people are coming back through the expertise of our physicians, of our world, of our medical world, of medicine. And then on the other hand, they are also not being poo-pooed as much. They're not being, told you're crazy. What are you talking
mm,
about? As
mm.
much, because it's 6 degrees of separation. We're talking about it. We're hearing about these experiences, and the more the experiences are spoken about, the less hmm, the less they may be ignored, put down, refuted. The fewer patients are told, you're crazy, you're nuts, I don't know what you're talking about, or the less the hush hush occurs as the code of silence within the medical field,
Mm.
because they may have experienced it, but never forget there's a code of silence.
Absolutely. I do think it's changing. It was really interesting. I went to a conference just a few weeks back where I was speaking at a conference, and I shared a little bit of my story. I didn't go into much depth around my near-death experience, but I did say, I'd had this experience. But what was really interesting was that there were 4 people in the room who had had an NDE. And we're talking not a huge conference. And, my heart was so full as we could see it. And it was blinding obvious for the attendees as well that this was becoming a very main theme of this conference that was about something entirely different. And so I love to see how it's sort of weaving its way in without us even having to collaborate that together, without our
Yes,
intention.
yes, yes,
The
yes.
messages are coming to light, which just, I get so encouraged by this. I think it's beautiful.
It is beautiful, and I love the way that you frame that. And it truly, it is the fact that you're able at a conference to ask that question.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Which is, times are changing. The conversation is definitely changing.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
So I
Oh,
want to go back. You talked about how you talked very briefly, you're on the TV show and that you are helping people with psychic abilities, your psychic abilities. Is that something which you had at an early age? I'm very curious about your childhood as you had your experience in utero and then you were aware of death at 2 years old, asking these questions. And then later on in life, you're in this TV show helping people through a psychic ability. How does that all connect? Is that all from your experience, do you believe?
I believe that there's a connection. I don't know that it's all from the experience. Certainly, the experience. Another common piece for NDEs is they see and feel things that they might not have seen and felt, that they're more open, whether they want to be or not. You know, they're seeing the lens of the world is different, what they perceive, what they take in. So there is certainly a connection between being coming out of the womb and just feeling very open and wanting the world to just be a place where we gave to one another, where we were generous, where we were kind. Like I call it like my Buddha. And so from a very young age, that Buddha was very alive within me. What I learned though is I had to put the Buddha away because there wasn't tolerance for the rescue, the kindness. And so there had to be a way to be kind, but not be so out there with it, not be so vulnerable. There needed to be a sense of protection. And through a swallowing, a quieting of needing to put what I call the Buddha away, other things begin to develop, like being a watcher, being aware of what is around me. Now, I wouldn't say that, oh, I have psychic abilities. Yet I would say that through a series of things that I've experienced in my life, from abuses and being overweight and the ways that we protect ourselves, made me a little bit more of a seer, invited me to understand the psyche without telling you why I could, or what got generated within me when I could say, I have a sense that this person is not going to be around for a very long time. And when that would happen and I was accurate, it was scary, but it was also like, okay, so this is something that I have a knowing about, this relationship again with death, with dying, with maybe not dying as in someone is leaving, but the dying of the soul, and how to help the soul come back. The soul, the native soul, and getting back to one's nativity within the self. And what ended up happening, I guess, was I realized I have to invite my Buddha back in. And it was right around the Psychic Kids period of time when I invited that metaphorical internal Buddha of, I can't hide anymore. I need to come out and play. And so working with these kids, I would say many of the kids had a history of some kind of difficulty, family life, hard family life. And working with adults, I can almost always say that they've got some kind of abuse, some kind of near-death experience that they went through that caused them to go through what I call a supreme ordeal, which is really comes out of Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. And I see this and the platform of all of this through the lens of a hero's journey. We start our ordinary lives, we go through a near-death experience or some trauma that is like a near-death experience, where we've lost some major essential part of the self. And we go through a supreme ordeal. It is that Kundalini awakening, that is that spiritual emergency. And then we need to find a way to go back into an ordinary life, but we are forever changed.
And that's something you're seeing quite commonly with your...
I would say that, if anything, that is a common thread.
What other common threads are you seeing?
I'm not happy with previous relationships. Divorce. Divorce rate is high, or counseling within a marriage afterwards because things that weren't called upon or what was accepted is no longer accepted. So I would say that that is a common thread. Um, Thoughts of suicide can be a common thread, depending. And there are a lot of reasons why someone, might be thinking about suicide, and they may have had thoughts of suicide prior to the NDE, and so
So,
something is not complete.
so how does that play out? Does that mean that the tendencies towards suicide are stronger if they were there before the experience, or are they weakened, or is there not enough?
I don't have enough data on
Yeah.
that. I've seen both. One is it's
Right.
weakened, and the other is it's gotten stronger, because now that I know what's on the other side, I really don't want to be here, and I have no reason to be here.
You talked about the high incidence of divorce or being unsatisfied with relationships.
Yes.
It's probably a very difficult thing to actually analyze, but I'm assuming that that's with people who have had the experience after they've been with their partner or their husband or wife.
Yes.
My question that my brain is in overdrive. It always is when I have these conversations. But, I'm thinking, I wonder if that's relevant for people who had the experiences as children, because is there the potential that we could grow a different way or a slightly faster way that means that over time we get those same frustrations with our partners?
Can you talk more about that? What you mean?
Yeah, maybe I'm not making any sense at all, which is quite
no,
common.
I think you're actually making abundant sense. I'd love to hear more on this right now, like
So I'm just wondering if people have the near-death experience as a child or earlier in life before they meet their partner or their life partner, are we still seeing a high rate of divorce or relationship breakdown later in the relationship? Or is it only the people that have been with their partner, had the experience, and then stayed with their partner where their relationship breaks down because they come back different?
So I don't have the answer. Yes, it makes perfect sense. I don't have an answer for you. With that said, if that child who had a near-death experience was able to just talk about it and was held by their families in such a way that it didn't make them feel that there was something wrong with that experience, or that experience was negated, or they were told, don't ever talk about this ever again. If what they received was, talk about it whenever you want, we believe you, we will hold you, we will talk with you, we will delight in whatever the experience was, and we know that you may want to talk about it, or you may not, and we will honor however this unfolds for you. That the outcome in terms of relationships, like with any good child with a family that loves and cares and understands, that they have a better chance of having a good partnership outcome if they choose to be in partnership. A child that's told to keep it down and don't talk about it and pretend like it didn't exist, then what else do they have to pretend doesn't exist? Where else are there silences? Where else do they need to say, okay, I can't be me, I've got to swallow my Buddha?
Yeah.
And then how does that affect the outcome of a partnership? How do you trust? How do you feel safe if you don't even have a sense of that when you were a kid? So, and there are some kids who don't even remember.
Yeah.
Okay, they don't remember, and that's fine. And they may, at a later time, through dream work, through a sudden flashback, that they don't understand, or a dream that keeps coming back over and over. And if they're able to go and talk to someone about it who's got some education around near-death experiences, then there can be an opening.
So what I'm hearing is quite often in the initial phase, for the children in particular, a lot of it is the family connection, the family support,
Yes.
as they go through that. So yes. I would imagine that you've worked with quite a few families as well as the people who are going through what they're going through. And I know that we do get quite a few supporters or family members listening to this podcast to try and understand the experience further when a loved one has one. What would you suggest? How can we help people who are going through an experience or a trauma or a crisis or something like that? How, as we as supporters, how can we help them and aid their ability to stay grounded and live their best life, I suppose?
When a child has gone through trauma, their parents have also gone through that trauma.
Yes, definitely.
Right? It is, and sometimes parents will go into overprotective mode because they feel badly that they weren't able to protect their child from that trauma, or they feel that they could have done more. There's sometimes that message of guilt, there's the archetypal, guilt that just is overwhelming and is loud. And children can perceive that the parent is feeling guilty in or that something is up. So there's a couple of things. Number one, the parents, need to work on their own trauma experience with their child. But they need to work on it, not with their child, but work on it on their own, or with a therapist, or with their partner, and not shut it down. Again, not shut it down. Children who've had near-death experiences can sometimes feel abundantly so much more mature because they're speaking a language that is a language that is ancient. On the other hand, they can also be very young because there may be something that they're missing developmentally because they've skipped over something that they really needed to go through. So as parents, it's important to understand that both may be true, that your child can seem so wise and that they're seeing and that they're knowing in ways that they never did, but they're missing their playfulness. And so how do you start to become more playful with your child and not make things so serious all the time? And this is not an all or nothing conversation, is it? I mean,
exactly.
Right. So every child, just like every human being, is different. And when I talk about grief, I say grief is like your fingerprint. No one has it. It's as individual as you are. And, grief does not follow any plan. There's no right way or wrong way. And it's nonlinear. Right? I wish I could say to people, so you're going to go from A to B to C. You'll probably take a break, and then you'll go to D, and then E and F, and everything will be fine. It doesn't work that way, right? Sometimes you start with X, and then you go to B, and then you go to triple C, and and it doesn't make sense. And so, when working through this, it's understanding that you're going to come at this from so many different levels, and there's no one right way.
And I assume that that's relevant for not just families with children going through experiences, but partners with maybe older, with parents going through something. I think it'll be right across the board. Actually, we can apply the same principles.
Across the board.
Yeah,
across
exactly.
It's a big piece that I talk about because this is complicated and it's complex. And grief responses around this are complicated and complex. And the way that we deal with this is complicated and complex. And
so personal.
And it's so personal. And it's in your face, and then it's as far away as can be. And it can overwhelm, and you can feel it, and then on the other hand, you might be just completely numb. The first phase, and I talk about grief in phases rather than stages, because a stage I see as beginning, middle, and end, whereas a phase kind of moves in and out. It's like the tide, right? So sometimes you're flooded, and when you're flooded, it's like you're gasping for air and you're hyper emotional and you're all over the place. And then other times that tide goes out and it's ebbing and there's like nothing and it's stillness and you're kind of numb. And I call these phases, like this first phase, the phase of emotional armor, because it's a place that you will go back to time and time again, whether you're flooded or whether you are numb or you're someplace in between. It's the place to go to when you're needing protection because of the nonlinear nature of it all. And so, you know, when you're saying, I can't feel anything, instead of being afraid of it, welcome it. Welcome it. And if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling like I'm being flooded, it's like, okay, maybe I just need to be flooded and be in this moment right now, and that's okay. And as a parent or partner, to say, okay, so my partner is being flooded, and if you can share language, it's a really good thing. So if you, as a partner, the near-death experiencer can say, I'm flooded right now, and the partner can say, okay, you know, I how can I hold you? What can I do? And ask the question, because sometimes we actually do have the answers, and sometimes we don't. But be in your curiosity when you're a support person.
I think it's essential. I think we have to, don't we?
Yeah.
Now, Edy, I understand that you've written a book. It's Grief, the Dance of Self-Discovery Through Trauma and Loss. You have so much experience and so much wealth of information on this. Tell us a little bit about your book for anybody who might be interested to find out more about what you have been talking about today.
I love talking about this book.
That's a good sign.
And the reason is, so I just want your listeners to know that this is not specifically for someone who's experienced a near-death experience.
Right.
It really is the idea that grief is evergreen. We experience it in so many different ways, on so many different levels. And so it's for someone who has lost a loved one, or who has had a near-death experience, or who's lost a limb, or who's had sexual trauma. And it's the idea that the answers are not out there. The answer is within the self. And so this is a book of a journey of getting to know you and what works for you, what doesn't work for you. So I'll talk about how you need to communicate with your body, how you need to communicate with your voice. I talk about the archetypes and the archetypes from the critic to the judge, and how you might want to invite new archetypes in, like the cheerleader, or even like wild woman, you know, and maybe it's wild woman or wild man, but that's the part of you that can have more fun rather than needing to be serious all the time. So this is a multi-layered book that invites the reader to look at themselves in the dance so that they can allow grief to be their best teacher, and allow the near-death experience to be a teacher and a guide, and not make you feel like you're an outlier, but rather you've got this internal conversation that you need to share.
That sounds amazing. That sounds incredible. We will definitely put the links to that in the show notes so people can go and have a look. And yeah, again, Edy Nathan, I just want to say a huge thank you for coming on. As we're talking, my brain has just been in overdrive. I'm not sure if most of my questions have even made sense because it's just firing away in all these different directions. But it's very obvious how much knowledge you have, how much experience you have, and how much you've got to give for this whole discussion, this whole conversation, whether it's trauma through a near-death experience or through another area in life. And I just know that people listening to this episode, it's going to help them greatly. So Edy Nathan, thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the work that you do and for this program and for getting it out there. And people are very lucky to have you in their lives.
Oh, thank you. Oh, it's a little hard to take. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast show. If you've enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, tell people about it. I'd love to get these messages out there. Don't forget you can also pick up your VIP access pass for additional content at patreon.com/Kirsty Salisbury. You can connect with us via the Let's Talk Near Death Facebook page, and I look forward to catching you for another episode soon.